Within weeks of Angel Reese's departure, the Chicago Sky signed 4 elite players. Not 4 veterans with nowhere better to go. Not 4 roster fillers looking for minimal contracts. 7-time All-Star Skylar Diggins-Smith. The 2024 Most Improved Player and First-Team All-Defensive selection is Dazani Carrington. Veteran Azura Stevens has real championship experience. One of the league's most explosive young scorers is Rakia Jackson. They were all unwavering and didn't require persuasion. And that speed, that almost instantaneous rush toward a franchise that had been detailed for 2 years. You can learn all you need to know about what was truly going on inside that locker room, which has been called as one of the least desirable locations in the sport. Because franchises don't instantly change depending on where they are located. When the thing that was making them unwanted is gone, they change. The entire league is currently keeping an eye on what happens when that item is eventually removed and what happens to the player who moved it. What you are about to hear is not analysis disguised as conjecture. A front office that reached its breaking point and took pennies on the dollar to close the chapter, a documented 2-year trail of behavior that ultimately collapsed under its own weight, and a downstream effect that is currently subtly changing the Eastern Conference in ways that are crucial for every team still chasing the Indiana fever. You were correct if you've been observing this situation and felt that there was more to the story than a straightforward roster change. It goes far beyond what the box score ever disclosed. And by the time we're done, it will be difficult to ignore the whole image. Let's begin with the figures, which appear perfectly plausible on paper. During her tenure in Chicago, Angel Reese was selected to the All-Star team twice in a row. In back-to-back seasons, she led the league in rebounds and consistently recorded double-doubles. Those specific standards seem to be exactly what a cornerstone player is expected to provide for a team that was obviously in rebuilding mode when she joined. This is the question that the superficial coverage continues to dance around without providing a comprehensive response. Why did the Sky post 10-30 the next year after finishing 13-27 in her first season? That is not a dip for rebuilding. As young components grow and organizational processes take hold, teams in real rebuilds demonstrate gradual improvement. Chicago demonstrated a squad that was headed in the wrong path while having the same star player for 2 seasons. Instead of plateauing, the victory count declined, and it did so during a time when the front office was aggressively investing in nearby pieces rather than doing nothing. The rebounding numbers that were so spectacular on the stat sheet were a big part of the reason why something in that equation wasn't adding up. They're not exactly what they seem at first glance, therefore they merit a much closer examination before we completely ignore those boards. Reese's offensive boards accounted for a sizable amount of her rebound totals, and a significant portion of her offensive rebounds were the direct result of her own missed shots. The sequence would repeatedly unfold in the same manner. She would attempt a close-range shot, miss, get the ball back, and possibly miss again on the putback. On the official stat sheet, every one of those grabbacks was identical to a valiant defensive rebound that was clawed away from a physical postman in traffic. That's production disguised as high-volume activity. Without really moving the ball into offensively advantageous locations, it inflates the counting figures. Furthermore, it never made any significant progress in the win column over the course of 2 full seasons. The board totals appeared to be historic. The record appeared to be a collapsing franchise. The on-court issue was worrisome enough on its own, but the turning point occurred off the court and early enough in Reese's tenure that the trend was obvious long before the front office took official action. Since the target wasn't a guy without standing in that locker room or a marginal roster piece, it is necessary to grasp exactly who was involved in order to comprehend how harmful it was. One of the most decorated veterans in the history of the team, Courtney Vanderloot, arrived in Chicago. A 5-time All-Star, a 2-time WNBA champion, and a 2-time selection to the first team. In order to assist Chicago in stabilizing and starting to build toward something sustainable, she left the New York Liberty, a team that was rightfully vying for another championship at the time. In a professional locker room, that kind of sacrifice is quite significant. Veterans gain reputation that younger players haven't had time to acquire by giving up contender circumstances to invest in rebuilding organizations. Reese allegedly referred to Vanderloot as old and washed while she was recovering from her injury, and he didn't keep that criticism to himself. The crew quickly adopted the characterization. Teammates will stop at nothing to support a veteran like Vanderloot, whose reputation and example influence how everyone else in the building behaves both on and off the court. There's no need to guess how that landed. While recovering from an injury, A younger teammate publicly disparages the kind of player who gives up a championship opportunity to invest in your team and who is respected by everyone in the locker room. The shoot-around the following morning won't clear up the miscommunication. That is a fracture, and once they have set incorrectly, fractures in professional locker rooms don't heal properly. Because of Camila Cardoso's character as a person and a professional, her circumstances were even more illuminating. She doesn't have a dramatic personality. She doesn't look for friction or create confrontation. When Cardoso shows up, she settles in, keeps her head down, and lets the basketball speak for her. Professionalism, not being the focal point of any narrative unrelated to the game itself, is the foundation of reputation in the league. However, Cardoso physically left the room during a team scenario that directly affected Reese. It wasn't a minor argument that was discreetly settled before to the next session, nor was it an instance of annoyance that subsided overnight. She got to the point where she just wouldn't stay in that room because she was the player Chicago was legitimately built its entire future around, the focal point the team saw as its legitimate long-term foundation. Consider what it truly takes to persuade a player with that particular temperament to make that particular choice. It's not necessary for the setting to be uncomfortable. It must be so damaging that the only sensible thing you can do is to distance yourself from it. Subsequently, the suspension was imposed, and it is important to recognize the significance of this decision inside a professional sports organization. The suspension decision is not made hastily or carelessly by franchises. It's not the first nor even the second response. When the front office has exhausted all of their quieter options, they are suspended. The private discussions, the official cautions, the interventions, the redirections, and the attempts to reframe the scenario so that the player might react differently. The situation has usually been getting worse for a long time by the time an organization suspends a current player, particularly one with all-star credentials and a public profile. The front office isn't behaving rashly. They've just used up all of their options for internal management and covered the associated expenses. The pattern's consistency over time, not a single incident, was what made it so damaging. This wasn't a single challenging period that was unduly magnified or a single negative event that organizations sometimes absorb and move on from. Over the course of 2 full seasons, the behavior followed the same identifiable arc, affecting various individuals and circumstances while consistently causing the same kind of harm. In the end, the confirmation came from those whose opinions are most influential when assessing a locker room setting. Even Reese's teammates went public. They referred to it as locker room cancer. In professional sports, that kind of terminology doesn't come up until the harm was so severe, well documented, and real that those closest to it concluded that the cost of remaining silent surpassed the professional code, which often keeps internal disputes private. By default, players defend one another. It's one of the most enduring standards in professional sports, spanning leagues, cultures, and decades of how these settings function. They manage conflict behind closed doors, close ranks, and project a cohesive image to the outer world. When that code is broken and active players are recorded using such precise and pointed language, it indicates that the circumstance was having an impact on their professional preparation, mental performance, and feelings when they entered the facility each day they arrived for work. The front office of the Sky was keeping an eye on 2 things at once: a locker room that was quietly breaking apart from the inside and a victory total that was steadily dropping. Reese was generating, according to the stat sheet. She was the center of the issue, according to the locker room. The company began weighing the costs of ending the situation against the costs of continuing to manage it forever when those 2 truths could no longer live in the same building. Reese went public with remarks that effectively expedited the front office's decision-making process following her 2nd straight postseason loss. She told the Chicago Tribune that she wasn't going to settle for the same results and that moving forward, getting better players, great players, would not be negotiable. After hearing that comment, the organization silently began compiling their own non-negotiable list in light of 2 years of losses and a documented locker room in disarray. It didn't have her name at the top. The financial structure of the WNBA provides crucial background for everything that came after. Because the league's compensation scale is more constrained than that of professional basketball as a whole, every club move has correspondingly greater ramifications. Financial flexibility and roster depth can be used to handle moves that cause roster instability or personnel disturbance in the NBA. The margins are narrower and the impacts spread farther in the WNBA. When Chicago ultimately decided to proceed, the terms of the agreement they accepted conveyed the complete narrative without the need for anonymous confirmation or insider information. In 2028, There will be 2 first-round selections and a second-round trade. That's what Atlanta spent for a player who had led the league in rebounding for back-to-back seasons and received all-star accolades in both of them. One observer compared the entire return to a bag of chips. Reactions on the internet ranged from sincere amazement to dark amusement. In the WNBA, future draft capital isn't worthless, but you shouldn't accept it for a player you truly think will change the course of your team. Teams struggle for months to maximize the return when they reluctantly trade a true star due to cap restrictions or a scheme mismatch. They require instant assets that have been verified. They persevere through several rounds of negotiations until the package accurately represents what they are giving up. None of that was done by Chicago. Atlanta showed up with future assets that won't be seen on a basketball court for years, and the Sky accepted the offer quickly enough to allay any doubts about the front office's true perception of the issue. One source gave a clear description of it. Chicago was so desperate to find a solution that they accepted the first good offer. That isn't a team getting the most out of a cornerstone player. That's a franchise that will pay whatever it takes to swiftly end a chapter and resume operations. And after that chapter ended, the events that followed happened at a speed that was nearly painful to observe from the outside. The one thing that forever undermines the 2-year idea that the brand was just a lousy destination is how quickly Chicago changed after Reese. Before making a decision, Skylar Diggins-Smith didn't spend weeks researching the organization's course. She put her signature. Before grudgingly choosing Chicago, Dazani Carrington did not carefully consider more alluring rival offers. She put her signature. Without hesitation, Azura Stevens, a seasoned professional with real championship rings and the power that comes with that kind of background, decided on the Sky. Before the summer was even over, Chicago made a deal for Rakia Jackson, one of the league's most sought-after young players. For 2 full years, organizational dysfunction and geography were the acknowledged explanations for the Sky's inability to draw talent.